March 23, 2018, 30-year-old Bailey Beck was driving when she was pulled over by Las Vegas Metro Police. Her car was searched, and a large amount of narcotics was found. She was charged with transporting a large amount of drugs and agreed to cooperate with detectives as a police informant. She told detectives that she was a drug runner for the Asian street gang, Sons of Samoa, and the white supremacist gang, the Aryan Brotherhood. Beck also took Metro officers around the Las Vegas Valley to show them locations where drugs or people affiliated with drugs could be found. This continued for 3 days, starting on April 2, 2018. Shortly after, Beck attended a Sons of Samoa gang party, where a gang member expressed suspicion that she was a snitch and that her life might be in danger. Beck reported this information to her Metro handler, a narcotics detective, but was unsure if the warning was genuine. However, it turned out to be true. On April 8, Christopher Wagant, a member of the Sons of Samoa, along with 3 other gang members, discovered that Beck had been cooperating with authorities. Christopher proposed a plan to inject Beck with drugs to force her to confess if she was a snitch or not. One of the 3 men disagreed with the plan and backed out at the last minute. Christopher and another gang member went to Beck's residence pretending to be cool, unaware of her cooperation. Minutes later, Beck's roommate heard her scream loudly and saw 2 men running out of her apartment. Beck crawled downstairs and hid in her parking garage, but she was found deceased 48 hours later. An autopsy revealed that she had been given a lethal hot-shot injection consisting of heroin and methamphetamine. She also had blunt force trauma to her head, resulting in brain bleeding. During the investigation into her death, Christopher's name was mentioned 3 times as the last person seen with Beck. Christopher was arrested and charged with her death. He struck a plea deal and pleaded guilty to battery with the use of a deadly weapon, a lesser charge due to a lack of physical evidence. He was sentenced to 10 years in the Nevada Department of Corrections. Since 1997, Kenyal Brown was a career felon who did drugs, sold drugs, assaulted people, and committed gun crimes. He was a seasoned informant with street cred. In October 1999, he was arrested for the illegal possession of a taser and attempting to sell it. After this arrest, he began to cooperate with investigators in a plea agreement, agreeing to plead guilty in exchange for testifying against other inmates so that the charges against him would be dropped and he could be released. In September 2000, Brown was arrested again for drug possession and attempting to sell, but was released yet again after he provided information on crimes committed in Southwest Detroit. In February 2001, Brown caused an accident during which 1 person died, and another was seriously injured. He tried to flee the crime scene but was arrested soon after and charged with second-degree murder, resisting arrest, intentionally inflicting moderate injury resulting in death, driving without a license, and illegal weapons possession. He was convicted and received 10 years imprisonment, but was paroled in 2010. Brown was charged in 2015 with being a felon in possession of a gun after being caught with a loaded pistol. It was his 3rd gun offense. He faced a minimum 15-year prison sentence under a then federal law that was designed to punish repeat violent offenders. But due to his past cooperation with law enforcement, he was sentenced to 15 to 21 months in federal prison. A year after he was sentenced, he entered into an agreement with the ATF and the DEA to become a federal informant, and was released after serving 15 months. After he was released from prison, the conditions of his release were to remain on parole. Over the following years, Brown repeatedly violated his parole conditions by testing positive for cocaine and marijuana, missing drug treatment meetings, and being arrested multiple times for drunk driving. All of this was supposed to land him back in prison, but the judge let him out at the request of several federal law enforcement agencies. In 2019, the ATF would hand him off to the Detroit and DEA task force, but the ATF did not notify the Detroit Police Department of his violent and reckless history and intense drug habit. As an informant for the police department, he was very unuseful, as he had only given 1 tip of gang and drug activity at a location in Southwest Detroit, for which the police department paid him $150. However, the information he provided led to nothing. But on December 29, 2020, Brown would go on a killing spree. It would begin when he visited 3 friends at a house where they drank alcohol, and later on, Brown would eventually ask them for money. They refused, so he pulled out a gun and shot Clifton Smith 23 times and shot Kimberly Green in the head. After shooting the 2 of them, he then went downstairs, murdered Dorian Patterson, and left the scene. Weeks later, on February 18th, Brown shot and killed 49-year-old Garcias Woodyard in Highland Park while trying to rob him. 2 days later, 41-year-old Amir Thaxton was shot dead inside his clothing store in Detroit, with his money, valuables, and caravan stolen. 2 days after that, Brown shot dead 36-year-old Eugene Jennings while trying to steal a car. By this time, Brown had a $10,000 reward for his capture and was wanted for 5 murders and 2 carjackings. On February 24, 2020, Brown was seen visiting an adult bookstore in Oak Park. He was identified by 2 employees who called the police. The police arrived and, while conducting a canine search of the area, spotted Brown jumping fences in a neighborhood. Brown attempted to sneak away by moving through houses, but was spotted by tenants. After that, he was surrounded by law enforcement officers in a backyard. While trying to detain him, Brown attempted suicide by shooting himself in the head. He remained alive, but due to complications, he died 4 days later. The man who was shot 23 times in the first house shooting survived, and in 2023 sued the city of Detroit for protecting Smith, who was a known informant and knowing how violent he was. The lawsuit is still currently ongoing. In April of 2008, neighbors of Rachel Hoffman's apartment complex filed complaints that Rachel's apartment constantly smelled like marijuana and voiced suspicion that she was selling drugs. When the police arrived, they asked her if she had any illegal substances inside. Hoffman said yes and allowed them to search. The cops seized 176 grams of cannabis and 4 ecstasy pills tucked beneath the cushions of her couch. Hoffman faced felony charges and a possible prison sentence for possession of cannabis, with intent to sell and maintaining a drug house. Police attempted to persuade her to identify other marijuana dealers to avoid the charges, but she refused. The police then pressured her to act as a confidential informant in a drug sting operation, in exchange for not being charged with additional drug charges. Hoffman's legal worries were augmented by the fact that this wasn't her first drug offense. A year earlier, while she was a senior, police pulled her over for speeding and found almost an ounce of marijuana in her car. She was ordered into a substance abuse program, which required regular drug testing. Later, after failing to report for a test, she spent 3 days in jail, so she chose to cooperate. Eventually, one day, Rachel was getting her car worked on at a mechanic shop by Andrea Green and Danilo Bradshaw. They noticed Rachel's car smelled like marijuana and joked about how they could get her some and also plenty of other drugs. So when she went back, she had a wire planted in her purse by the Tallahassee Police Department, and she put in a request to buy 500 ecstasy pills, 2 ounces of cocaine, and 2 handguns for $13,000 cash. The order was a very unusual large amount, and she told both men that she wanted the drugs for friends who would be visiting from Miami, and she needed the guns to feel safe. By early May, the deal had been arranged. She was to show up with $13,000, and they'd make the swap at Bradshaw's parents' house, in a quiet, green neighborhood on the outskirts of Tallahassee. Behind the scenes, the police worked up an operational and raid plan, which involved more than a dozen local and federal agents. On the afternoon of the drug bust, Hoffman drove to police headquarters. Officer Pender placed a surveillance wire and a recording device in her purse, along with stacks of money for the buy. Andrea had changed the meetup site to a nearby park called Forest Meadows, one unfamiliar to Rachel. She was informed not to follow the suspects to the new location, but technical issues prevented her from actually receiving the instructions. Her police handlers lost track of her when the wire they had improperly installed on her failed, and she agreed with the suspects to change the plans and left the buy spot, and she followed behind the sellers in their stolen silver BMW. Rachel had acknowledged on the wire that the street was a dead end, and law enforcement kept telling her, turn around, do not follow them." Then the phone cut off. Officers began frantically searching the area. The DEA plane circled overhead, its agents unable to see owing to the dense tree cover. By the time a police team arrived at the narrow turnoff, Hoffman and her car were no longer there. Instead, they found a spent .25 caliber round, 2 live ammunition rounds, 6 cigarette butts, and a single black flip-flop. 2 days after she disappeared, her body was found in Perry, Florida, a small town some 50 miles southeast of Tallahassee. She had been shot 5 times in the chest and head with the gun that the police had sent her to buy. Danielo and Andrea were charged with armed robbery and first-degree murder in connection with the events leading up to Hoffman's death. It would be revealed that Andrea and Danielo had given Rachel a bag full of aspirins to make her think that it was ecstasy, and then they took off with her purse and the money. They left but realized a surveillance wire was in her purse, so that's when they went back and killed her. Daniela was found guilty of first-degree murder with robbery and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole plus 30 years. Andrea was also convicted of Hoffman's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Eventually, the Tallahassee Police Department began to acknowledge that it had made mistakes. An internal affairs investigation revealed that police officers had committed at least 21 violations of 9 separate policies in Rachel's case. And in May of 2009, her parents won a $2.6 million settlement from the city of Tallahassee in a wrongful death lawsuit.
You're gonna end up dead too.